While everybody in the National Hockey League looks at November 26th as a pivotal date in their schedule, for the Canadiens, that date came 2 weeks early. November 13th is the date. They lost Alex Newhook. Changes were made to the lineup. Were they good? Were they bad? Let's take a look. Let's talk some puck. Hey gang, Costa here from PuckTalk Montreal, welcoming you to this November 24th edition of the show. And you may agree or disagree with me, but here's what I think I should say. Does Zachary Bolduc really deserve to be on the first line? Before we go in depth, let's take a look at our partners. InstaCustoms.com is Canada's highest rated print shop with over 3,000 Google reviews and a 4.9 star rating. They offer direct-to-garment printing on all your favorite clothing, along with coffee and travel mugs, and they even offer embroidery. Habs won a Stanley Cup? You can win too on Stanley Street at InstaCustoms.com. CheapersTshirts.ca has men's, women's, and children's t-shirts, all sizes, hoodies too, with over 1,000 products to choose from. Anything you need for merchandise or the best deals on everyday clothing, CheapestTshirts.ca is your go-to source. Buy today, ship tomorrow, CheapestTshirts.ca. Now don't get me wrong, I like both players, Juraj Slafkovsky and Zach Bolduc, but they're two different kind of players. And so when Marty St. Louis had to look for a fill-in for Alex Newhook on the second line, to me, the obvious choice would have been to take Bolduc and put him on that line with Kapanen and Demote. That didn't happen. Instead, he decided to break up the first line, bringing Juraj Slafkovsky down to the second to play with the youngsters and putting Bolduc on the top line. What propagated that decision? Well, you would think that because Bolduc got off to a good start to the season, scoring a few goals, getting the fan base excited, that might continue if he's put on the top line and get more opportunity. But that didn't exactly happen. Instead, Juraj Slafkovsky, Kapanen, and Demote saw a little bit of moderate success as Slafkovsky learned to adapt to the way they played, and they've been productive. So what is there to say about this? I think, personally, that the Bolduc on the first line experiment should be over and done with. After all, when you take a look at Slafkovsky, and again, I'm going to bring this up. I'm not an advanced stats type of guy, but I had to look at them here. Analytics play a big part in decision-making, right? When it comes to any coach in the National Hockey League, here's my decision-making. When I take a look at that top line, when it's built up of Caufield, Suzuki, and Slafkovsky, they score 3.66 goals per 60 minutes. Among the top lines in the National Hockey League. So why would you break that up? Well, when you look at Zach Bolduc and the way he started the season, scoring, I believe it was 4 goals in his first 4 games, I mean, you would think that, you'd be kind of excited, and that's where the direction you wanted things to go. You even saw Zach Bolduc take Demote's spot on the power play on the first unit to see whether or not it could change things up. Well, it didn't. Why? Well, there's a few reasons behind it. Number one is that Zach Bolduc is a streaky player. He's not a guy who's going to be consistent throughout the season. For those of you of a certain age, you'll remember Mr. October, Brian Savage, where Brian Savage would score close to 15 goals in October, and then for the rest of the season, maybe he'd score 10. That's beyond streaky when you talk about goal scorers. But there are a lot of guys who were streaky on the Montreal Canadiens at certain points in their career. Max Pacioretty, sometimes he would go cold, but then he would score 8 to 10 goals in a streak and bring his numbers back up. That's kind of where I see Zach Bolduc. I'm not saying he's going to get anywhere near Max Pacioretty numbers, but what I am saying is, notoriously, he's been streaky, whether it's with St. Louis, Junior, you name it. So to expect him to be more consistent over time, this early in his career, is a little bit of a misstep, right? You would expect him to maintain his habits at least through the first few years with the Canadiens, assuming that they do re-sign him down the road. Now, that being said, one of the biggest things that I've noticed, and this is all eye test, this isn't about analytics at this point, it's that with Juraj Slafkovsky off that line, there's no longer that physical presence to go in and forecheck hard to get pucks out. Bolduc's not that player. Slafkovsky is. Despite the fact that everybody harps on Juraj Slafkovsky because He was the first overall pick a few years ago, and, they expect him to get a certain number of points. Measuring a number one overall pick isn't necessarily all about points. It's about production, and production is not all about numbers, right? It's not about goals and assists. It's not about any of that. Production is everything. Your entire way of playing. So Slafkovsky going in and separating man from puck so that Suzuki could sweep in and pick up the puck in support is not a bad play. It is exactly what you expect from a guy as big as Juraj Slafkovsky. Now, that's not to say that Slafkovsky is not trying to become a better passer, because as we saw against the Leafs, he started the passing play that went from him to Demidov and then to Dobson, tic-tac-toe for Dobson's second goal of the hockey game. So he has that capability as well. That's not something we've seen yet from Zach Bolduc. So it begs the question, why in the world would you continue to focus on having him there and not try to put Slafkovsky back up with Caufield and Suzuki while you put Bolduc with Kapanen and Demidov? And here's my thinking, right? Since the change, we really haven't seen a lot of production out of Slafkovsky and Caufield, whether it's at 5-on-5 or on the power play. They're getting their chances, they're not finishing. The other thing that we've noticed as well is Caufield's taken a little bit more of a beating because of the fact that Slafkovsky's not there to shoulder the load when the puck is along the half wall. So now you're seeing Caufield taking a few more bumps than he normally would and not smiling as often as you would like to see him. Sure, he smiled on Saturday night when the Canadiens won 5-2, but he didn't really contribute to that win, did he, when it comes to the offensive side of the game? So ask yourself the question, do you want to see Slafkovsky on the first line? My answer to that is yes, because if your first line is your most productive line, why are you breaking it up just to fulfill another gap? It's a cardinal mistake for a coach to do that, because then you're doing your own team a disservice by breaking up chemistry that's been built over the better part of a full season and a half that line's been together. Why break that up, especially if they continue to produce and you're seeing more points being delivered by Slafkovsky in the process? I can't understand that. Caufield was leading the league in scoring when he was at the 12-goal mark. That's gone away. Suzuki was a point-a-game player. That's kind of dwindled a little bit as well as his point production has come down. Slafkovsky, sure, he doesn't produce points as much as we'd like, but his play hasn't missed a beat. He's been good in his own zone. He's been good in the offensive zone, opening up space for his teammates and allowing them to get quality scoring opportunities. The fact of the matter is, if guys like Demidov and Kapanen don't finish and don't shoot the puck, that's not on Slafkovsky. So his game has not changed whatsoever from the first to second line, and he continues to create space and opportunities for the guys he's playing with. But when you're looking at a line like Kapanen and Demidov, when Newhook was there, you weren't expecting Newhook to be a physical guy. So why would you replace him with somebody who's physical? That's the part I don't understand. Keep your first line's chemistry intact. Keep the whole continuity of that line together, because they were playing well. They were leading the way. And while you weren't getting secondary scoring at that point, you also needed that primary scoring from that line to maintain your ability to win hockey games. The minute they took them off, then it all began to dwindle even more. What more can you say when you take a look at that, right? When you take a look, the advanced stats show that, according to Money Puck, Slafkovsky, Suzuki, and Caufield, their expected goals for share is 62.6%, right? Anything over 60% is upper echelon in the National Hockey League. So again, think about it. Why would you change that? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. You know, at the end of the day, Caufield and Suzuki are more productive. So having a physical presence like Slafkovsky on that line makes sense, because you need that physical presence. He's a deterrent. While he doesn't drop the gloves, he's also the guy who's going to engage physically in the offensive zone to get that puck away. He's strong on the forecheck. He's not afraid to get his nose dirty. Sure, we've seen him fall over a couple of times, but he fights really hard to get that puck. And more often than not, given his size and strength, he comes out with it. But tell me, what's the evidence showing that the performance of the line is better with Slafkovsky than it is with Bolduc? Well, number one, Bolduc hasn't gotten very many points on that line, has he? Number two, he's been taken off the power play because he wasn't productive there either. Despite the fact that in preseason, he boasted about being in the bumper on the St. Louis power play. Well, he hasn't been, he's been in the bumper on the Canadiens power play, and they haven't given him the puck. So if they're not going to give him the puck, what's the point of having him there? Instead, what you want to have is a guy who can distribute the puck a la Demidov, occasionally shoot, and you also want Slafkovsky's body in front of the net because, as you've seen in recent games, he takes the goalie's eyes away. Yes, this is my imitation of John Cena, and he allows the Canadiens to score at a little bit higher of a clip. You know, maintaining the chemistry and usage of that line is really important because you don't want to break it up. If you leave them separated long-term, it could be detrimental to them, not just as a line, but as players as well, because then it changes the whole dynamic of what's expected from each guy on that line. While Suzuki and Caufield expect to be able to interchange the puck amongst themselves to be able to score, they also incorporate Slafkovsky in the sense that he can also get in there, muck it up, get in front of the net, get some rebounds, whatever the case is. So they know what to expect from each other because they've been playing together for so long. Bolduc is an unknown for them. Despite the fact that he's a good hockey player, it doesn't mean that they're instantly going to have chemistry because of that. There's, adaptability in place. They need to get used to each other. Chemistry, as we call it in hockey. It's just, I don't know. It's a small sample size, I know. They haven't really played together all that often. I get it. It's only been 4 games. While Slafkovsky was with Caufield and Suzuki for the better part of a full season last year and the beginning of this year and able to create that chemistry, Bolduc hasn't been really given enough time to create that link between players. So do you want to keep him there or do you want to put Slafkovsky back? In my opinion, to me, it's more important to maintain some kind of continuity. Why, if that's the case, why are you keeping Evans, Gallagher, and Anderson together when you broke them up earlier in the season so you can create more balance on the lines? You brought them back together because of the fact that they have better chemistry. So why not do that same thing with your first line, which has been a productive line since the beginning of the year? I don't understand that change. I never will. We used to laugh at Claude Julien and Michel Terrier and the line blender, as we used to call it, where things weren't working. He would just take everything and throw it and mash it up and throw this guy on this line with this person and not really have any rhyme or reason behind the decisions that he makes, right? And we laughed at it because it was a sign of desperation. I know that the Canadiens were in the midst of a losing streak. I know you want to try to change it up a bit, but taking your best component and breaking it apart in order to put it back together later on, it's just like what we've been complaining about as far as the goaltenders are concerned, right? We know that Sam Montembeault has been struggling since the beginning of the year. Jakub Dobeš played extremely well to start the season, going 6-0, and then was given the opportunity to go cold because Montembeault was put in nets. And while Montembeault did not get any better, although he did put in some very good efforts, his consistency still is not there. Dobeš was thrown back in, his confidence shot, lost to New Jersey, and all of a sudden, you've got a guy who's lacking confidence as well. So you don't want to see that in your forwards. You don't want that to happen, do you? You want to keep that continuity. You want to keep the players happy. So what's the solution? Especially for that second line. Well, you take a look at that line and you think to yourself, you need a guy who's got a little bit of speed, who's got finish, and who's capable of going up and down the ice as quickly as Kapanen and Demidov. Can Bolduc do that? Certainly. And Bolduc, to his credit, has shown that he's capable of winning faceoffs in the offensive zone when called upon. So why not have him there as that left-handed faceoff alternative? I have no problem with that. But put him with Demidov and Kapanen. I think it's a better option there in order for you to put Slafkovsky back on his original line. Demoting Slafkovsky wasn't the answer. Slafkovsky didn't deserve a demotion because he's been producing. He started the season well. Why take him off that line? Well, yes, he plays well with Demidov. I get it. But he plays much better with Caufield and Suzuki. Now, how do you get Zach Bolduc to prove that I'm wrong? That's the other question. Well, if you're Marty St. Louis, you put him aside and you tell him to just play hockey. Because right now, he's going through the motions, but he seems to be lost out there. Sure, he's playing well in his own zone, but he's not contributing anything on offense. And here's the thing that a lot of people don't factor in. When players come from other teams, for example, when they come from St. Louis, that plays a much more rigid defensive style and plays a box plus one defensive strategy, putting them into a situation where you've got to play man-to-man in the defensive zone, it changes their whole thought process completely. And yes, Bolduc had the entire preseason to try to figure this out. And to a certain extent, he did. But at the end of the day, it's not something that players learn overnight or a system that players adhere to as they're being developed. Instead, we all learn to play box plus one. As we grow older and we get into the higher levels, whether it's junior or professional, that's where we see the variances. That's where we get to see a man-to-man system, or maybe a hybrid where you play man-to-man when you have 4 guys or less on the ice, but you stay in box plus one when there's 5 guys out there. Variances like that. Not necessarily something that you do on a regular basis. And to me, that would be the right way to teach it. Start with playing at 4-on-4, playing man-to-man. Then moving to man-to-man and 5-on-5, so the guys adapt to being able to follow the guys that are on the ice. That's something that we've seen, and a lot like basketball, right? It's about creating, I wouldn't say picks, but confusion on the ice when you're on offense facing a man-to-man defense. A lot of player lane changes where one player goes from one lane to the next and interchanges while the puck's being moved creates a lot of confusion, especially man-to-man. And that's oftentimes where you see these gaps in the D that lead to goals, like the ones that were scored by Werenski and by Chychrun in the last couple of weeks. So Bolduc needs to adapt. It's as simple as that when we're talking about not just on offense, but defense and getting it all together. And now that the Canadiens have acquired Alexandre Texier as well, who he himself is coming from St. Louis, that's another guy who's going to have to adapt if he's inserted into the lineup to a different defensive system. And again, that's not easy. Marty St. Louis saying in his press conference today, he's not sure when Texier is going to get in there, but it is what it is. So we'll see what happens. But for my money, I would rather see Slafkovsky back on the first line and Bolduc on the second line to see how much production he can bring there. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the decision to send Joshua Roy down to the American Hockey League, which to me, again, was a no-brainer. Roy really hasn't brought a lot to the table. I'm sorry, right? We expected more from him. There was a lot of hype about him in the preseason, and nothing came of it. Roy, not really a line driver, more of a line follower where he doesn't generate scoring chances. But that's what the Canadiens need from somebody like Joshua Roy. And it's not that he doesn't have the skill set to do it, but it's up here that he doesn't have it. He's never been that guy, right? When you take a look at his journey at the World Juniors, he was on a line with Connor Bedard. Well, who's driving that line? Let me guess. We know that answer. So I understand that Joshua Roy needed to go down to allow Texier to be in the lineup. I get it. And given what Florian Jacki did the other day in his NHL debut, there was no way he was going right back down to the American Hockey League because I think that Habs Nation would revolt. But what does that mean for Joshua Roy? What happens to his career at this point? He's been called up twice already, and twice he has not been able to really bring anything to the table. It's the whole reason why the Canadiens went out to get Texier in the first place, because they need a little bit more support. They don't want to bring up guys like Meshar or Beck at this moment because it seems like they don't have a lot of confidence in their ability to play at the NHL level. And given the fact that they're in the midst of a losing streak, or they were in the midst, I should say, of a losing streak, it's not really a situation you want to put a young player in. So I get that part. And by the same token, it was a little unfair for Joshua Roy as well to be put in that situation. So sending him back to Laval, the right thing to do. You bring in the guy with a little bit more experience in Texier, and you see what happens there. But are the Canadiens done? I really don't think so. But I also don't think that the Canadiens are looking at anybody like Steven Stamkos, for example, right? Or, for that matter, even Ryan O'Reilly. Not yet. we're jumping ship a little bit here, a little early. I get that the Predators are in the basement of the National Hockey League. I get that the Predators are going to be looking to offload salary and try to start a rebuild under Barry Trotz. And that's going to include getting rid of assets like Ryan O'Reilly, like Steven Stamkos. But at the same time, what should the Canadiens do? Well, be patient. You're not there yet. Maybe by Christmas, you'll have a better picture. Come out of this slump. So win a couple of games in succession. Get your feet back under you. And then decide what direction you're going to go in. Right? Don't assume that the Canadiens are going to make a change simply because we want them to make it. Because at the end of the day, just adding players isn't the solution. Right? You need to add the right player. Can Ryan O'Reilly be the right player? I absolutely think he can. Can Steven Stamkos be the right player? Absolutely. But at that price tag, I don't know if it's worth it. Not yet. The closer the Canadiens get to the playoffs, maybe. But right now, stick to the status quo. You've picked up Texier for a little bit of depth. Let's see how that goes. If it doesn't work, fine. If it does, you look like a genius. So that's it for today's episode. Tomorrow, we look at previewing the Canadiens' next game versus the Utah Mammoth. It's out in Utah, so the game's probably going to be sometime around 9:30. I haven't looked at the start time. We'll check that out tomorrow. Thanks again to our partners, instacustoms.com and cheapesttshirts.ca. And let me know what you think about the idea of putting Slafkovsky back on the top line. Do you agree with me? Is the experiment with Bolduc over, or do you want to see more? Do you think that not having Slafkovsky there is hurting that top line? Put it in the comments. I want to see what you have to say. Maybe I'm not coming out of left field here, but for my money, I'm putting Slafkovsky back. Tell me what you think. We'll talk tomorrow.